Hi, everybody. Welcome to the February 19th, 2016 edition of Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's get a quick take on how Pope Francis's comments about Donald Trump's desire to build a wall on the Mexican border and Trump's response is affecting the presidential circus. Patty Cahoon from Westward. The only thing we were missing in this whole campaign was a pontiff, and just like a gift from the heavens, here we are.
I know, and that's what I was going to say. When we had talked about who was going to be the new pope the last time on the show, I said, who cares? Now, could we have we couldn't have a more entertaining presidential candidate, and now we could not have a more entertaining pope. There's some discrepancy on what he actually said, but I would say he should have been a little more Christian in how he said it.
David Kopel from the Independence Institute and DU Law School. Trump has not been afraid to offend anyone, so I can't imagine he's afraid to go after the Pope here. Do you think there's going to be some after effects from his comments?
The after effect, we see the effects now. We actually had like several minutes on television when Donald Trump wasn't the main story, and Pope Francis stepped in and ruined that. Holy hypocrisy, Pope Francis. You are the head of state. You've got a UN delegation in your state. It's surrounded by a giant wall. It's a huge wall. It's bigger than the wall Trump would build. And you build it, you have it, as popes in their city-state have for centuries, to keep out people you don't want to come in. The Vatican City has the most restrictive immigration policy in the world. Way more restrictive than the United States, even more restrictive than Mexico, which is extremely tough. If he wants to set a good example, instead of wagging his finger at Americans, how about you take in some of those Syrian refugees or Mexican job seekers? The Vatican City's small, but they could build a giant apartment tower in it, 35 stories tall if they wanted to, house some of the world's displaced. Why don't you take the mote out of your own eye, take the beam out of your eye before you go around picking on our motes?
As a visitor to St. Peter's Square just a few months ago, I think there's a little easier to visit. Maybe not immigrate to the Vatican, but a little bit easier to visit than it would be to come across a Trump wall.
Nobody's stopping Mexican tourists from coming into this country.
Let's keep it rolling. Penfield Tate, attorney with QTAC Rock, longtime state lawmaker. We have a pretty big support, both with Catholics and non-Catholics, for Pope Francis. Is that going to affect any Trump supporters, or is that a non-factor?
I don't know if it'll affect any Trump supporters. It won't matter in South Carolina because South Carolina is, 3% Catholic and 97% something else. Mm-hmm. So they probably are pleased with the fact that Trump took on the Pope. It's kind of interesting, just the parallels, because this Pope up to this point has been known for being outspoken, non-conventional, and addressing and confronting issues in the church kind of head on, and challenging the church and those in the believers of the faith in terms of challenging some of their thoughts and opinions and traditions. And so I don't think in many ways, as Patty pointed out, it's not a surprise that he called this out. He's been calling out a lot of people on a lot of different things. But in his typical fashion, Donald Trump overreacted bombastically, intentionally, because he's getting the desired effect. That's all everybody's talking about, is now Donald's going after the Pope. I think it's just another brick in the wall of logic building against Donald Trump, that people question his temperament and really his capacity and capability to be the commander-in-chief of this country. He's making the best argument against his own candidacy. That'll build over time.
Ed Sealer from the Denver Business Journal, wrap it up for us.
First, Donald Trump makes the argument that the government should lead the efforts to discriminate against a particular religion in Muslims, and Paul Ryan rightly calls him out for not understanding the term conservative. Now, at a time when other presidential candidates are discussing the idea of a twofold strategy, one being let's secure our borders, but let's also help the people that want to come into this country, Donald Trump rightly gets called out by the Pope for not being Christian, because all he's saying is hate, 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 not, hey, how do we balance this out? And he acts like something is surprising here. I'll tell you what term he does understand, though: narcissism.
Indeed. The death of Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia last weekend has triggered a political fight between President Obama and the U.S. Senate, which may have ramifications here in Colorado. Michael Bennett's re-election bid already had a considerable amount of attention, but now with the slim GOP Senate majority in play, the stakes have been raised even further. Patty, here we have a huge national story, but a Senate race right here in Colorado that this is bound to be a big part of. What do you think?
Well, I think until the Pope jumped into this presidential race, the only other thing we were missing was a dead Supreme Court justice and the suggestion that someone had killed him with a pillow, maybe the Pope. If you've heard that whole theory, that, that he was found with a pillow over his head and it was murder and Obama murdered him. Anyway, this is a crazy, crazy part of this campaign now. Obama is still the president. He is still the president for almost another year. For him to nominate a chief justice makes sense. The Senate does have the choice of confirming or not confirming his nominee. So that whole argument just strikes me as yet another bunch of whining in this presidential campaign. And I can't imagine that Colorado's Senate race could get any hotter. So it's an issue, of course, people are going to really be fighting over this seat, but whether they're going to be fighting over this seat, whether or not Obama has already tried to push through a new Supreme Court justice. Gardner is anti-Obama naming anyone, and kudos to Bill Cadman in the State House, because he actually said, hey, no problem. If Obama is going to nominate someone, the Senate has the choice of confirming or not confirming.
Dave, I guess that's where my question starts. What's the better play for the Senate? To be open to a nominee and have an up or down vote and say yes or no, and then likely they'll say no, and let that kind of be the course of action, or to stall the situation?
Well, it's to follow the Constitution. As Patty said, the president has the absolute, uncontrollable right to nominate. It says he shall nominate, and so that's his prerogative. He can nominate anyone he wants. If he nominates people like he has in the past, the previous two justices, or sort of anybody one could conceivably imagine him nominating, the Senate has its own authority to either have a vote or not. As Harry Reid accurately stated when he was leading an attempted filibuster of Samuel Alito's nomination, the Senate has no obligation to give any presidential nominee a vote. Ever. That's their absolute choice. In a way, it's more candid for the Republicans to say, no means no. We are not, consent. If you look at the administration's guidance on Title IX, what is consent? There is no consent here. An Obama nominee would be like Sonia Sotomayor, who testified before Congress and said, I consider Heller settled precedent. I testified against her nomination in the Senate Judiciary Committee, said her record is terrible on this issue, and within months, when she was on the Supreme Court, she voted to overrule Heller. Another Obama nomination is virtually certain to create 5 votes to nullify the Second Amendment. Lots of other constitutional rights, like the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which protects First Amendment for exercise of religion, would be in jeopardy. Article 1, which says the president, that says Congress, not the president, has the exclusive lawmaking power. I think an election is a very good time to have a national referendum on, do we want a Supreme Court that is going to enforce the text of the Constitution, or one that will supinely bow before the will of whoever wants more and more unchecked power?
Penn, if you're President Obama, which way do you play this? Do you go with a nominee that you know would have no chance, even if you had 3 or 4 years left in your term, or a nominee that's fairly moderate and pushing the hand of the Senate, saying you're not even going to consider someone who is considered by a large group of people as a moderate judge? Which way do you play it?
Well, there are a few ways, as you pointed out. Let me back up for a second and lay a predicate. First of all, I think I take issue with how we frame the question. Justice Scalia's death didn't trigger the fight. What triggered this fight was Senate Republicans announcing the president better not nominate anyone just because it happens to be an election year and there's countless precedent for prior presidents who have nominated Supreme Court justices in the last year of their presidential term. So there's no question about that. Second point that David pointed to is really important. The Constitution says the president shall nominate justices. So it's not a right of the president, it's a mandate and a prerogative. This is your duty. You have to nominate justices for Senate consideration. So whether the president does it or not is not the issue. He has to, consistent with his constitutional responsibility, and he will. In terms of what happens at that point, that's really a problem for the Senate. This president has placed three justices nominated, I think, 2 justices to the court now. Both have been confirmed. There's been some rancor. It's taken a while, but both have been confirmed. I would also say on the other side, I think Clarence Thomas's nomination took the longest period of time, and that took 100 days, and we have more than 100 days left in the year to get this done. So time is not the issue. Senate Republicans, I think, have to be more careful about this dynamic than the president does. The president can nominate anyone he thinks is qualified. He can play it safe and nominate any number of federal judges he has appointed to the lower courts who have been confirmed by the Senate by votes of 97 to nothing and other overwhelming majorities, or he can pick someone who's not on the bench. The problem Senate Republicans have is trying to come up with a rationale that works with the public in an election year to explain why they're rejecting a candidate, which is why they're taking all these preemptive strikes, because they know they won't have good reasons for anyone the president nominates. So they're trying to lay the groundwork and start some conversation now. And I think they may have shot themselves in the foot, literally and figuratively, Second Amendment notwithstanding.
Ed, let's bring it back to Colorado. How do you think this is going to affect the Senate race between Michael Bennet and a to-be-determined later Republican nominee, one of, I guess, 13 now at this point? How do you think it's going to affect it?
Well, I don't think we know right now simply because of what you mentioned there. There are 13 Republicans. I mean, 5 or 6 who are viewed as legitimate potential candidates in there. And while, the primary could be decided by 1 vote at this point, I don't know that this issue is going to surface as the one that's going to break apart the Republican primary and then is going to affect the differences with Michael Bennet. I mean, you really have to look at who could potentially come out of this. I mean, if this is going to be someone that's extremely conservative, like Tim Neville versus Michael Bennet, I don't know that this really factors into it this much, because this is not like something that would push Neville to being more conservative. If you look at someone like a John Kaiser, who is really trying to make this race about about Bennett's failure to be a strong foreign relations senator, I don't know that it plays a ton into that either, because this is a domestic race. Then you can get to someone like maybe a Ryan Frazier, who could put this into their basket of issues that they can run against Michael Bennet on. All in all, I don't think there are a lot of Coloradans who are trying to decide who to elect in 2016 based on whether or not Cory Gardner is saying we should vote or not on the Senate candidate. I think it will blend into the greater picture of differences between President Obama and the Republican Party. And I think that's going to be what this Senate race is about. Not Michael Bennet versus whoever is put up, but the general attitude of Obama versus the Republicans. And we'll have to see how many issues supplant this in importance between now and November.
The Denver Police Department announced this week that it found no violations with how officers handled a shooting of a suspected car thief in 2014, despite disagreement from the Denver Independent Monitor. The case was reviewed by DA Mitch Morrissey, who found that the officers were legally justified. Meanwhile, Morrissey gave a key endorsement to Denver Senior Deputy DA Kenneth Boyd in his run for Denver District Attorney. David, how important is the disagreement between what the police department and Mitch Morrissey found and Denver's Independent Monitor?
Less than you might think, because everyone's in agreement that the officers acted justifiably, appropriately, and in compliance with the then policy of the Denver Police Department use of force in firing the shots against by the way, a guy who had a arrest warrant for auto theft and was driving a stolen car at the time and tried to run over a police officer while escaping. The shootings were plainly justified. The question is, what about starting that confrontation at the time there at a funeral home when there was a funeral going on and there was a risk, which didn't come true, but there was a potential risk to innocent bystanders. That's the dispute. The one argument is, well, we didn't know it was a funeral home, and well, they did have a big sign up and said funeral home, and there were a lot of cars parked there. So that's the issue, but not the justifiability of the shooting itself. On the DA's race, Mitch Morrissey's endorsement is important to those people who want continuity, who think he's been doing a good job. There's another candidate from that office, Helen Morgan, who's also running. But he gave the endorsement to the one that he wants. Now, for the people who say they want to change from the office, there's also two candidates. Beth McCann, the state representative, who starts with a big former DA, big lead in name recognition and getting out there. But on the other hand, the two people who've hired her in the past, Ken Salazar and Wellington Webb, are endorsing another candidate, Michael Kerrigan, who's a former DA, currently a corporate lawyer at Holland and Hart, and in that regard has a lot of office management experience, which is an important thing of what the DA has to do.
Penn, so looking at the situation, the reason we can combine both these issues, you have not only another Denver Police Department issue coming up that makes headlines today, but you have a district attorney candidate who is endorsed by a district attorney who has a perfect record of not filing any charges against police officers, who worked for a predecessor, and Bill Ritter, who had a perfect record of not filing charges against police officers. And this particular candidate, Kenneth Boyd, is related to the predecessor. If you do like continuity, it sounds like you have a real good shot here, but I gotta believe with a lot of the headlines coming out, someone's gonna smell something fishy. What do you think?
Well, in terms of smelling something fishy, I think you could probably have gone back 3 or 4 or 5 other DAs and would have been hard-pressed to find a DA who ever filed charges against a police officer in terms of a shooting. Mm-hmm. I can't remember the last time I saw a DA issue an opinion that said a shooting wasn't justified. And I can't remember the last time the Denver Police Department investigated one of their own and said, gee, this was an unjustified shooting. So none of that is a shock. I think there is, when you look at not just the Black Lives Matter movement, but some of the other things going on in the community, where now these groups have challenged the mayor. They disrupted his speech at the MLK parade. They protested at a city council meeting in a rather, appropriate fashion, civil disobedience. This DA race is going to, I think, generate more attention than perhaps it has in the past. And I'm not certain that the endorsement of the current DA does you any favors at this point, because I think a growing number of people in this community are becoming disenchanted with the entire system, whatever that means. And I'm not convinced that any of these candidates is perceived as someone separate from or outside of the system. None of them have really made any, that I've heard, any groundbreaking statements about how the DA's decision here was wrong or the police department's decision here was wrong. I think the mayor has, to his credit on occasion, said, we're trying to fix this. We've got problems. Some of these things aren't right, but I can only do so much. If we fire somebody and career service rehires them, what am I supposed to do? So this is building. Right now, everybody's focused on the national issues, the U.S. Senate race, but at some point this DA race is going to come to prominence. And one thing that'll be interesting, to go back to David's point, Michael Kerrigan got a lot of endorsements early on because he started campaigning 2 years ago. So he signed a lot of people up. I don't know how those endorsements are going to hold up, or how this is going to shake out as more candidates enter the field and more issues like this develop.
Ed, do you think one of those candidates, while no one has really come out on a real political limb yet, could they make some hay, potentially, going out on a limb now, seeing the political climate around this issue in Denver?
Well, absolutely they can. I mean, this is a year when being the narcissist or being the socialist is not as bad as being the establishment candidate. So I think somebody who jumps out and makes waves could do a great thing. But as Dave and Penn have really succinctly said, I mean, it's going to be hard. I mean, you've got 2 of them who work for the current DA, one of them who's now carrying the I want to be the next Mitch Morrissey label on him. You've got a third in Beth McCann, who is clearly the establishment politically. I mean, she's worked for several DAs. She's been in the legislature for 8 years, and Michael Kerrigan, who's not really that far off of being the establishment either. So I don't know what the play is here. I mean, I think if somebody was going to jump up and say the DA's office is very poor at what they're doing, they would have done it already. They're not doing it. I mean, I think what you actually need in this race, if you're going to have somebody completely shake it up, is a fifth candidate who comes in from the outside. And I'm not over-believing that could actually still happen. The more headlines that we see placed on Morrissey and his decisions on whether to prosecute or not. And, I mean, heck, as the Republican Senate race has proven, the more the better.
Patty, even though this is out of Mayor Hancock's hands legally, the DA is going to decide that, does he end up, or will he end up paying a political price for what's going on, at least the perception of what's going on with the DA's office?
Well, I'm not sure he'll pay the political price, but some of the candidates for DA will. I think Ed's absolutely right. Someone else is going to jump into this race, and they should jump in not as a Democrat, because the race otherwise is going to be pretty much over at the primary. When we've got 4 Democrats, come June, at the end of June, we'll know who the next DA is, unless someone else jumps in and runs against them. They'd have to do it not as a Democrat. And I think given the amount of interest in the presidential race this year, the socialist, the narcissist, and everybody else who's running, I think come November, people would be really interested in looking for a non-establishment candidate, and that would have to be a new candidate in this race.
Sounds like a great C.S. Lewis book, the narcissist, the socialist, and the wardrobe. I don't know. Anyway, let's get a quick take on this one. Out of the 3 states impacted by the Gold King mine spill, Colorado remains the only one that has yet to announce plans to sue the federal government. New Mexico and Utah are pursuing legal action against the EPA, which has admitted to having experts who warned about the impending disaster. Penn, your quick take on this. Should Colorado get involved in a lawsuit?
Well, on this one, I give the AG Kaufman credit for taking her time studying the issue and deliberating. Making a fast decision to sue doesn't necessarily mean you're right. And she's looking at a number of different issues, and I respect her judgment in that regard. It's clear that I think Colorado probably suffered the greatest impact from the spill since it started here and the actions originated here. But I think the AG is doing the right thing, studying it, weighing options, considering it. My guess is that ultimately she'll decide to bring the suit. But I don't have a problem with her waiting and being thoughtful about this.
Ed, you're a man on Capitol Hill. How do lawmakers feel?
Lawmakers, seem to want to not really play a part in this. I mean, and I'll tell you why, is there's a general feeling that while she may be waiting and she may be either taking her time or looking like she's taking her time, Cynthia Kaufman is going to sue. She's jumped a lot quicker to sue the federal government on things that are a lot more divisive in Colorado. This is one where I think everybody would be feeling pretty good about it. I would be absolutely shocked, and I think most of the people in the Capitol will be absolutely shocked if she doesn't announce that she's suing soon, too.
Patty's just Kaufman buying her time?
I think so. I think she will wind up suing too. But in the meantime, you've got all the most affected areas in Colorado trying to decide, do they go into the Superfund program? Do they not? So there are a lot of negotiations going on at the federal level. And if this lawsuit comes in, it could screw that up too. And let's watch Sally Jewell subpoenaed next week to talk about this in front of Congress.
David, wrap it up for us.
Cynthia Kaufman's a very conservative person. I don't mean that ideologically. She's cautious. And I think she's waiting to see. There's a difference between saying the EPA behaved very badly, and it would be crazy to have this bad actor come in to be the one that's going to rescue you by turning this into another Superfund monster project. But do you have a good legal claim in court? I think she's waiting to see how that develops.
Let's get to our favorite part of the show, Disgrace of the Week. Patty, as always, start us off.
Well, you should always wonder when people want to buy naming rights, especially of football stadiums. Invesco, we all remember that. Now we have Sports Authority Field. Sports Authority, which is going into bankruptcy. They say they're going to be able to keep the naming rights. We'll see. But in the meantime, let's keep an eye on what happens at the Gart Sports Castle, which fortunately is still owned by Gart's property, not Sports Authority. So that great landmark on Broadway, we hope will remain.
I didn't know that detail. That's very nice to know. David.
The so-called Southern Poverty Law Center, which is really the Dudley Brown of left-wing direct mail fundraising. The Denver Post published as if it were something real, the center's latest report on hate groups in Colorado. And when you drill down, a lot of it is they're calling a hate group people who just disagree with them on issues like immigration or gay rights.
Penn.
Well, I have a thought. If we want to make it westward field at Mile High, I'll donate Patty. So, but mine is the attorney who decided to sue the University of Tennessee and gratuitously included in his complaint Peyton Manning in an incident that goes back to 1995, I believe. It's just poor form to take a swipe at somebody who, by all accounts, has been a statesman and a gentleman and hopefully is on his way out on a very high note.
Ed.
I think we could probably agree that the coverage of Windmageddon was a little overblown. But the fact is, if you have to shut down a stretch of the state's busiest highway because a giant corporate sign is teetering in the wind, maybe we should think about not allowing permits for signs to go that high, or at least forcing this one, that being IKEA sign, to come down so we don't have to worry about detouring thousands and thousands of cars off the highway again in the future.
It's over 3 times the older sign limit in that entire area. 3 times as high as it. Don't get me started on IKEA sign. Say something nice about somebody. Patty.
Westward gives grants every year to artists, and researching which artists would win this year just reminds you what an incredible art scene Denver has. In tough times for them, just because rents are going up so high, but wonderful people doing really exciting things.
David.
American Furniture Warehouse, which unlike IKEA is a Colorado-based business and not a welfare queen. They do everything themselves instead of expecting the taxpayers to make their living for them. And American Furniture Warehouse signs have never blown down onto any highway.
A great claim to fame nowadays. Penn.
Colorado Democratic Party, for their Jefferson Jackson dinner, invited both Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders to speak, and both showed and both spoke, and they basically gave them the entire program. Pretty bold move for an organization that normally hasn't gotten that kind of attention from presidential candidates in the past.
And we'll talk about that on our CIO postgame. That's our web exclusive section in just a few minutes.
Denver chefs Jen Jasinski, Frank Bonanno, Steven Redzikowski, Alex Seidel, and Dana Rodriguez all nominated this week for a James Beard Award, the Oscars of the food industry.
Nice. That's all the time we have tonight. Be sure to tune in to Mississippi Remixed on Sunday night. It's a great, great program. And the finale of our latest season of Street Level on Tuesday at 7 p.m. We'll revisit the Pearl Street Mall in Boulder. As always, remember to check out the CIO podcast on iTunes and our web exclusive segments on Twitter. For everyone here at Channel 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks for watching. Good night. Welcome to the February 19, 2016 edition of Colorado Inside Out Postgame, a special web-exclusive production here on Channel 12. Let's get a quick take on Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, and Chelsea Clinton visiting Colorado this week. The presidential candidates attended the Colorado Democratic Party's annual dinner on Saturday, and Chelsea Clinton visited Boulder and Denver on Thursday and Friday. Patty Calhoun from Westward, where do you think Colorado's going to go in this race? I mean, it's down to two candidates, but we tend to like underdogs. Is it time for Bernie here?
I'm thinking people have Clinton fatigue at this point because Bill is coming back again this weekend. He'll be speaking in Pueblo and I think Colorado Springs. So I think we're just getting a little tired of the Clintons coming through. I don't think that'll affect the vote that much, but certainly coming here I don't think helps Hillary all that much. I do love the fact that at the allegedly no longer called Jefferson-Jackson dinner, that they had Hillary Clinton, they had Bernie Sanders, and they were going to have Martin O'Malley until he dropped out of the dinner after he dropped out of the presidential race. So that, by all accounts, was just a great enlivening evening.
I think O'Malley was still invited, but he was parking cars, so it was a whole different thing. David Cole from the Penn Institute and DU Law School. What do you think? Who do you think is better on the stump for Hillary, Bill or Chelsea?
Bill, he's one of the great political talents of the last half century. I mean, Chelsea is a good speaker, but she's not at that extraordinary level. By all accounts, Hillary Clinton gave a great speech at the not Jefferson, not Jackson dinner. Maybe when some of the national reporters said it's one of the best they'd ever heard her give all campaign. But it may not be enough. There's a new poll that just came out today from the Washington Free Beacon, which they supposedly sampled 1,100 Coloradans, which seems large and expensive. But according to that, Bernie's got a 49 to 43 lead currently. Now, predicting caucus turnout is a difficult thing to do. But I'll also say if Hillary loses badly in Colorado and every other state that votes on March 1st, don't count her out. She did quite a comeback against Obama in 2008, actually won more votes in primaries than he did in 2008. If you want to get the theme of her movie, go watch The Revenant. There is nothing you can do to her. She will keep on coming after you. Even you could cut off all her arms and legs, and she would roll downhill or roll uphill and keep on going. She is a fighter, and she will be in it to the very, very end.
Monty Python's Black Knight,
yes.
If you will. He'll get you.
Yeah, except this one, she'd leap up and bite the guy's neck off and kill him.
Penfield Tate, attorney with QTAC Rock, a long-time state lawmaker. Not sure where you're going to go with that, with those metaphors, but it's your guess. What do you think? What is your guess of the mood of Democrats? Whether they're going to be voting for Sanders or Clinton, what's the overall mood of Colorado Democrats right now?
It's interesting, and I was at the not Jefferson, not Jackson dinner, and based on the response the speakers got, I will tell you the mood is wholly dependent on who shows up caucus night and then who turns out to vote. If you watch the crowd, when Hillary spoke, and she gave a phenomenal speech, and I think I'd offer that among the entire field on every side of the aisle, she is without question on paper and based on experience the most qualified, but people don't like her. Right. And so this is one of those issues where you may be the most qualified, but that may not be enough to get you elected. She gave a wonderful speech, and when you watch the crowd, and I intentionally stood in the back because I wanted to see the whole thing, the people who responded to her were sort of the traditional party regulars and activists. And I think they chanted, "We're with her, we're with her." And then when Bernie came out and spoke, he gave also a good speech. I had seen snippets of him before, and sometimes he kind of fumbles around, and sometimes he seems like he's forgotten his point. He was on that night. He was on point. He delivered a great speech. He hammered his points. And the people who responded to him were all of the young folks. And they were screaming like, feel the burn, and Bernie, Bernie. And it was interesting to watch those two parts of the room. So I would offer to you, if the traditional Democrat is who shows up at caucus, Hillary blows him away. If we see a repeat of what happened the first time President Obama ran, when on a snowy night at caucus, you had people standing up and lines going around the block to check in, and none of the party regulars could move fast enough to get everybody in the caucus rooms, Bernie's going to beat her.
Ed C. Lever, reporter with Denver Business Journal. You're a guy at the Capitol. Do you get a sense of where Dem lawmakers are on this?
Oh yeah, this is a Clinton crowd. I mean, the establishment is a Clinton crowd. And in fact, we can debate how well Bernie Sanders is going to do in caucuses and primaries all we want, but if Clinton continues to get all of the super delegates, does it really matter? And I think what's going to happen here, the more interesting story is not necessarily who gets the nomination. I mean, I still feel like it's going to be pretty hard to knock Hillary Clinton off the nomination here with the establishment support and with the fact that other than New Hampshire, she's not polling is getting blown out anywhere. So she's going to get a lot of delegates from the caucuses and primaries. The question is there going to be a unified party when this is done? I mean, especially with the process that this has gone through, the number of people that have chided DNC chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz for limiting debates, putting them on at midnight on the Home Shopping Network, really seeming to do, everything she could do to get Hillary nominated, and then, having all of the establishment Democrats not affected at all, and it's still going superdelegate vote, despite the growing fervor for Sanders. This is really one of those situations where if I were the Democratic Party, I would be worried that Hillary ends up being your nominee, and you have a whole bunch of people who aren't coming out to vote. And just remember, that young crowd that was standing up chanting "Feel the burn," those are the people who really got Obama elected. Not necessarily in 2008 when he blew out McCain, but who came back in 2012 when a lot of people didn't think they would and made sure that he handily beat Romney. Those young people don't show up. It doesn't matter who the nominee is. They're going to have a hard time assuming the Republicans nominate someone other than Donald Trump.
A very good caveat. That's all the time we have for Colorado Inside Postgame this week. Leave us a comment. Tell us what you think. For everyone here at CPT12.org, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks for watching.